Let me say to you that I'm finishing up a series this morning on living the powerful life. And we've talked about a number of ways in which we do that. The first Sunday we talked about coming together. I love this phrase out of this Mark Miller anthem, "No one stands alone." That could be one of our favorite sayings around here at Christ Church because we live it, we believe it, and we live it around here. No one stands alone. Today we're going to be talking about embracing a vision to change the world, because that really is what we're about at Christ Church. Somebody might come the first Sunday or two and say, well, this is about learning amongst ourselves. It might be about fellowship. And then after Sunday, they might say, get it. And they say, oh, no, this is about transforming the community around us. But if you come long enough, you know that Christ Church has a bold vision, and it is nothing less than changing the world one life at a time. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to look at a passage from 2 Timothy. This morning, I got fact-checked. We had 1 Timothy up there rather than 2 Timothy. I think that was my fault. And my reaction was, it's the same guy, but give me a break. But it is 2 Timothy. And this is from a translation called The Message. It's a contemporary, fairly new translation, and I really like how he translates this particular passage. Remember, Paul is writing to a protege whom he loves and whom he believes in. And he says this, that precious memory triggers another, your honest faith, and what a rich faith it is, handed down from your grandmother Lois to your mother Eunice. If I asked you how you got your faith, I wonder how many of you would be handed down from grandmother to mother, right? A lot of you, raise your hand. To your mother Eunice, and now to you. And the special gift of ministry you received when I laid hands on you and prayed, keep that ablaze. You see Paul's passion. He wants Timothy to remain passionate. And in this 7th verse we're going to be preaching about, God doesn't want us to be shy with his gifts, but bold and loving and sensible. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When I was in high school, I had a high school assistant football coach by the name of Bo Snowden. And he was the first one that told me the backstory about Raymond Berry. Now, this is where I get a little bit worried because some of you may be too young to know who Raymond Berry was. But Raymond Berry was a legendary Hall of Fame wide receiver for the Baltimore Colts. Teamed up with Johnny Unitas, an amazing career. Point out two things about Raymond Berry. In his entire career, he only dropped 2 passes. He only fumbled once. He and Johnny Unitas worked on their timing. Raymond Berry, if not the greatest wide receiver to ever step foot on the field, was surely the best route runner to ever play the game. And it was Bo Snowden who told me about the story about Raymond Berry. Bo had grown up in Paris, Texas, and he had played for Raymond's father, played high school football for Raymond's father. And this is what he told us. Raymond was not very talented. He was born with one leg shorter than the other. He was slow for that reason. He wasn't very large. But more than anything else in the world, Raymond Berry wanted to be a football player. So he worked and he worked and he worked. He was such an average player that even though he was playing for his father and for just a 3A team, he wasn't playing for Plano West, he never started until his senior year. Nevertheless, Raymond Berry wanted to be a football player. And he worked and he worked and he worked. He walked on at SMU. Earned a scholarship, worked so hard that after 4 years at SMU, even though he only caught 33 passes in those 4 years, he was named All-American and he was drafted in one of the late rounds by the Baltimore Colts. But Raymond Berry worked and worked and worked and became one of the greatest wide receivers ever. In the early 1970s, I picked up a copy of the Dallas Morning News and turned to the sports page and found an article written by Bob St. John, who started with the Dallas Morning News as a sports writer. This is a story that is 40 years old and that has, for the most part, been lost to history. He'd been out in Thousand Oaks, California, where, as you remember, for years the Cowboys had their training camp. Tom Landry had hired Raymond Berry to be the Cowboys' receiving coach. And Bob St. John says they were out there one day, they were on the field, they had the offensive unit, and Raymond Berry was coaching the wide receivers on how to run the sideline pass. And the wide receivers kept running it and messing it up, and Berry was getting more and more frustrated. Finally, he took his clipboard, threw it on the ground, and said, "Let me show you how to run this route." And so he ran the route himself to the sidelines. And he came back shaking his head, saying, something's wrong. He ran the route a second time. He came back, he said, something's wrong. He ran the route a third time. And finally, when he came back, he turned, big group there, the whole offensive unit. Landry was there, the assistant coaches, the trainers. And Berry announced to them all, this field is too narrow. There were Snickers on the field. Berry said, no, I promise you, this field is too narrow. One of the assistant coaches explained to Berry, the Cowboys have been coming out here for a decade practicing. California Lutheran has been playing on this field. This is a regulation NCAA field. There's no way this field is too narrow. But Berry insisted that they measure the field. He got two trainers and measuring tape. They measured the field. It was 1.5 yards too narrow. Berry had run that route so many times. He was so meticulous and so detail-oriented that he knew exactly how many steps it took to get to the sideline and still be in bounds. He knew the field was too small. I think it tells us two things about Raymond Berry. The first is he had taken his God-given gifts and developed them to the maximum. No one had claimed their gifts and worked harder than Raymond Berry. And the second thing it tells us is that he was unwilling to play on a field that was too small. And so that's our sermon for today. When you go to lunch today, you won't have to be sitting around saying, now what did the preacher say today? That's the sermon right there. Claim your gifts. To live the powerful life, we claim and develop our God-given gifts, and we make sure that we play on God's field, which is a really, really big field. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Paul's letter to the Corinthians. I'm pretty sure this is his first letter to the Corinthians. I've got it marked right here. The 12th chapter. And he talks about what he calls spiritual gifts. And it really is a remarkable chapter. Some of you know this is the chapter that precedes the 13th chapter. After this, he talks about love, about the importance of love as the ultimate gift. But this is what he says. Now, brothers and sisters, concerning spiritual gifts, we don't want you to be uninformed. And then he starts talking about all the spiritual gifts, and he starts naming them. And this is first century language, but he says there are varieties of gifts, but they all come from the same Spirit. He says to each person is given a gift. And here are a few that he names. The utterance of wisdom, the utterance of knowledge. Some people have the gift of knowledge. The gift of faith, the gift of healing, the gift of miracles. To another, prophecy, the discernment of spirits, different kinds of tongues. He talks about all the different gifts, the implication being that we've all been given gifts by God. They're all important. No person is more important than the other. And that no one stands alone. That no one stands alone. When we bring our gifts together and when we claim the gifts that God has given us, something truly remarkable happens in the kingdom of God. And so we see this theme repeated when he writes to Timothy. And he says, look, don't be shy with your gifts. What a remarkable phrase. Don't be shy with your gifts. How many of you have been shy with your gifts? This is Stewardship Sunday, but I'm not just talking about money. We don't want you to be shy with your money, but we don't want you to be shy with any of your gifts. Don't be shy with your gifts, but be bold, loving, and sensible. I'm going to tell you an Alexandra Robinson story. I called her Friday, said, Alex, do you mind if I tell this story? She just laughed. She said, no, it'll be fine. Alexandra Robinson, for those of you that haven't been here over the last few months, if you're new, until June, Alexandra Robinson was one of our associate pastors. She is brilliantly talented and gifted, as you all know. Back in, I guess maybe April or March, she was appointed to be the senior pastor of Walnut Hill United Methodist Church, but she didn't take that position until the 1st of July. So she was here for a couple of months before she went to her new appointment. And Alex had been very involved in a program that we called the Strengths Finder. Kathy Light back here is our consultant on the Strengths Finder. It's a personality test. It helps you find your strengths, claim the strengths that God has given you. Some of you have taken the Strengths Finder personality inventory. It's a wonderful, wonderful program. And Alexandra had been involved in helping to develop that program in the life of our church. She'd taken it. It had been really important to her. And yet Alex, as some of you know, is maybe the most humble person I've ever known. Richly gifted, but extraordinarily humble. And sometimes she just takes it too dadgum far. And so I guess it was about 2 weeks before she left to go to Walnut Hill, we were sitting in a staff meeting, and we started talking about the Strengths Finder and so forth, and she has a different set of talents and gifts from some of the rest of us that were sitting in the senior staff meeting. And at one point she said, well, since I don't really have the same gifts that the rest of you all have, it was just kind of a self-deprecating comment about implying that she wasn't as gifted as everybody else at the table. And after the staff meeting, I said to Alex, come to my office right now. She went to my office. I said, sit down in that chair. I closed the door. I said, Alex, I'm about to rough you up as much as I've ever roughed up any staff member in my 40 years. And she literally blanched. She turned white as a sheet. I said, Alex, you are one of the most gifted people I have ever known. And I'm sick and tired of hearing you denigrate the gifts that God has given you. I said, in 2 weeks, you're going to become a senior minister of Walnut Hill United Methodist Church. I expect you to act like a senior minister. A lot of you know that Alex tends to be kind of a timid person, but deep down she is a very, very tough person. And she is the most coachable staff member I've ever had. And she can take a critique like nobody I've ever known. She looked at me and she said, well, okay. And she got up, she walked out that door. I want to tell you something. She was 5'2" when she walked in. She was 6'2" when she walked out. And she never ever acted like anything other than the senior minister that she is. And one of our cabinet members, Marty Soper, is sitting out here. She'll tell you she's hitting the ball out of the park at Walnut Hill United Methodist Church. I take no credit for that. That was God's work. God gave her the gifts. She just decided in that moment, I'm going to claim the gifts God has given me. And it made all the difference. I may be wrong. It may be that everybody sitting here today has fully claimed the gifts that God has given you and developed them the way Raymond Berry did his gifts. But I'm guessing that there are those amongst us who have not claimed how richly God has blessed you in so many ways. And I've got to tell you, if you want to live the powerful life, the first thing you have to do is claim the gifts God has given you. And then embrace the vision that God gives us all. I said it earlier. I've already preached this sermon. You already know it. We are called to do nothing less than change the world. That doesn't mean we're not humble about it. I preached a lot on spiritual humility. I think it's important. But I also think it's important to claim the fact that God has given us a really big vision. And it's not a matter of the little things that we do in this church or the things we do in the community. But it is in fact the vision of changing the world one life at a time. I may be wrong about this, but here's what I think most of us do. We tend to draw boundaries around our lives, or we live in what I call little boxes. You think about this with me for just a moment. For instance, there is your work life or your business life or your professional life. And you think, okay, this is what I do in this box. And you try to do it as well as you possibly can. And then there's your family life or your home life, and you try to do that as well as you can, but you have a little box around that. And then there's your social life and your the golf course or whatever it is that you do for fun. And then there's your charitable life or your volunteer life. Maybe you go to the Children's Advocacy Center and you volunteer there some. What a great organization that is amongst lots of others. Come to the church and you volunteer some. You give some gifts to organizations that you believe in. But let me just suggest to you, if that's the way in which you think about your life, there's another way to think about your life, and that is to think about it holistically and powerfully. Remove those boundaries and draw a field that is big as the one that God has given you. See, what would it mean if we were to believe that somehow we are called to bring the kingdom of God, to build the kingdom of God in every part of our life? In our professional, in our business life, our home life, our volunteer life? What would happen to the way you think about your own life, about the potential of living powerfully, if you were to stop and think that every day you are called to live holistically with a vision, thy kingdom come. Build the kingdom of God. You know, I've advocated in the past for saying the Lord's Prayer every day. It's such a powerful prayer, and I have to admit to you that I don't always do it. I pray more in my senior years than I ever did. For some reason, I need to. But a lot of times I admit that I don't pray the Lord's Prayer every day, but I think that I should. Because it is such a powerful prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us whatever it is we need to live powerfully today. But just think about the Lord's Prayer. Jesus said to the disciples, he said, when you pray, pray like this. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. What would it be like if we were to pray that? Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. What would it be like if we were to pray that every day and take it seriously? That God invites us to not only pray for the kingdom of God on earth, where nobody stands alone, where we draw the circle wide, the reign of God's grace, where we not only pray for it, but we work for it. At work, at home, on the golf course, Children's Advocacy Center. A powerful, holistic vision. That may sound grandiose to you, but you've heard me say it lots of times. We follow the rule laid down for us by Mother Teresa. She said, we do no great thing, we do small things with great love. That's what we do at Christ Church. Small things with great love. We teach a Sunday school class. We take food to the crew that's building the house on the corner. We mentor a person in Project Hope. We volunteer with the youth choir. We do small things with great love. And when we come together, we create something truly powerful. A part of our vision to be a part of God's plan to bring the kingdom of God on earth. So we're going to close again today the way we have the last 3 Sundays. I'm going to show you this video one more time. The stained glass window behind me, our graphic artist took that window apart digitally, piece by piece. The pieces that you'll see are the actual pieces in this glass, and then our media guru up there, Ben Chamness, made a movie out of it. You'll see it here. This is what our lives look like, no matter how gifted and powerful we are. This is how our lives look like when we're just out there on our own, standing alone. Here's what happens when no one stands alone. We draw the circle wide. We come together. We embrace the beautiful vision that God has given us. We change the world one life at a time. Thanks be to God. Live powerfully.